In the hushed luxury of a Yakuza gathering, powerful men deliberately look past a 13-year-old boy, as if he doesn't exist. The clan boss's mute son sits isolated, his attempts at communication ignored with practiced cruelty. When he accidentally knocks over a ceremonial cup, the room's silence becomes suffocating. Suddenly, a woman with military posture responds to his desperate hand signals with precise movements of her own. The entire room freezes. Recognition flashes between them as they communicate in a classified code that no civilian should know. The Yakuza boss rises slowly, his face transforming from practiced indifference to shock. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story of hidden strength resonates with you, consider subscribing for more tales of unexpected power shifts. The top floor of Koga Tower gleamed with understated luxury. 40 stories above Osaka's famous Dotonbori district. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, neon billboards reflected in the canal waters below, casting multicolored light across the faces of Japan's most powerful men. Inside, the private dining room blended traditional elegance with modern opulence. Hand-painted screens depicting ancient battles stood alongside sleek digital displays, showing real-time stock movements and shipping data. Ryuichi Koga sat at the head table, his posture perfect, expression inscrutable, as he raised his sack cup toward his assembled guests. At 53, his hair showed distinguished streaks of silver at the temples, but his physique remained imposing beneath his impeccably tailored charcoal suit. The dragon tattoos hidden beneath were legendary in the underworld, markers of a rise to power that had left countless rivals broken. "To mutual prosperity," he announced in flawless English before switching to Japanese, his deep voice carrying effortlessly across the room. The assembled business partners and rival clan leaders echoed the sentiment, though the tension beneath their polite smiles was palpable. This port development project would reshape Osaka's economic future, and everyone present sought to maximize their share. In a corner of the room, partially obscured by an ornate screen, sat 13-year-old Hideo Koga. Despite being the only son and heir of the Kogagumi's Oyabun, the boy might as well have been invisible. His slight frame was hunched over a tablet computer, stylus moving rapidly across the screen, occasionally glancing up through overlong black bangs to observe the proceedings. When a server approached with refreshments, she placed a water glass near him without making eye contact, as though serving an empty chair. Near the room's main entrance stood the security teams, a mixture of Japanese men with the rigid posture and alert eyes of former military, and a handful of foreigners accompanying the international investors. Among them was Alexis Reeves, her auburn hair cut in a practical shoulder-length style, her black pantsuit conservative but allowing freedom of movement. Unlike most security personnel who scanned the room continuously, her green eyes frequently settled on specific conversations, her attention more analytical than vigilant. As negotiations progressed, Hideo rose from his corner and approached his father's table, tablet in hand. He moved with deliberate care, as though trying to disturb the air as little as possible. When he reached Ryuichi's side, he tapped the screen and held it out, indicating something on the display. Without turning fully toward his son, Ryuichi gently but firmly pushed the tablet away. "Not now, Hideo," he murmured, attention remaining on the American investor, speaking about financing terms. The boy's face remained neutral, but his knuckles whitened around the tablet's edges. As he turned to retreat to his corner, Ichiro Matsuda, Ryuichi's lieutenant with a face like weathered stone and a reputation for efficient cruelty, deliberately stepped into Hideo's path. "Careful, boy," Ichiro said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, though he looked through Hideo as if addressing the air. "Important men are working here." The room's reaction was subtle but clear. Several men smirked behind sake cups, others studiously focused on their food, pretending not to notice. The collective dismissal hung in the air like cigarette smoke. Hideo's shoulders tensed, but he navigated around Ichiro without expression and returned to his corner. Across the room, Alexis Reeves observed this interaction, her posture unchanged, but her attention now divided between her assigned post and the boy in the corner. When Hideo glanced up, their eyes met briefly before both looked away. As dinner progressed, the tenor of negotiations grew more pointed. Hayato Ishida, head of the rival Ishida Gumi and Ryuichi's most dangerous competitor, made a calculated remark about Organizations with clear chains of command being more reliable partners, his gaze sliding meaningfully toward Hideo. Some houses are built on stronger foundations than others, Ishida continued, swirling expensive sake. No weak links to compromise structural integrity. The implication hung heavily in the air. Ryuichi's face hardened imperceptibly, but he responded with a diplomatic comment about diversity of strengths in any organization. The American investors, oblivious to the undercurrents, continued discussing logistics and profit projections. Hideo, however, had grown increasingly agitated, his stylus moving frantically across his tablet. Twice more he attempted to approach different members of his father's inner circle, only to be subtly rebuffed. Alexis noticed his growing frustration and the way his eyes kept darting to the digital displays showing shipping schedules. The catalyst came during a formal toast to the project's timeline. As attendees stood, Hideo attempted to squeeze past Ishida's table to reach his father. His elbow accidentally caught a ceremonial sake cup, sending it spinning across the polished table. The precious liquid splashed onto papers and the sleeve of Ishida's suit. The room fell silent. The disgrace was palpable. Everyone deliberately looked away, pretending nothing had happened, their collective denial more humiliating than any acknowledgement would have been. Ryuichi's face remained impassive, though a muscle worked in his jaw. Ishida made a show of slowly dabbing his sleeve, his smile knife-sharp. Hideo's hands moved in frustrated explanation, a complex series of gestures beyond standard sign language, quick, precise movements that seemed almost militaristic in their execution. No one watched except Alexis Reeves, whose attention had suddenly become laser-focused on the boy's hands. Her professional detachment cracked for just a moment, a flash of recognition crossing her face before she carefully reassumed her neutral expression. As conversations resumed and attention moved elsewhere, Hideo retreated once more to his corner, shoulders hunched in defeat. But now, when he glanced across the room, he found Alexis Reeves watching him with an intensity that hadn't been there before. Something had changed. Something had been recognized. The business meeting continued as the evening progressed, transitioning from dinner to more serious negotiations. Digital displays cycled through maps of the port development, projection graphs, and security protocols. With each passing hour, the sake flowed more freely, loosening tongues and hardening positions on territorial control. Alexis Reeves had shifted her position slightly, maintaining her role near the American businessmen, but now with a clear line of sight to Hideo. The boy had noticed her attention and was careful not to look directly at her too often. But his awareness of her observation was evident in his posture. Ichiro Matsuda, Ryuichi's lieutenant, had also noticed this change. His narrow eyes moved between the foreign security consultant and the boss's son, a calculation occurring behind his impassive expression. Twice he walked near Alexis, ostensibly to check security positions, studying her with predatory assessment. When the American investors became engrossed in a technical discussion about dredging requirements, Hideo seized the moment of distraction. His hands moved in a short, deliberate sequence. Not standard sign language, but a military tactical communication system used by special forces operating under silence constraints. Across the room, Alexis's eyes widened fractionally before she controlled her reaction. After ensuring no one was watching, her hands formed a brief response. The same specialized system. "Who are you?" her fingers asked. "Help coming?" his replied. Alexis touched her earpiece as if adjusting it, her micro-expression communicating confirmation. When she moved closer to her American clients, her gait revealed military precision and combat readiness beneath the security consultant facade. During a particularly heated exchange between Ryuichi and Ishida over waterfront access rights, Hideo's tablet screen briefly displayed complex shipping schedules and security patrol patterns, information no 13-year-old civilian should possess. He manipulated the data with practiced ease, his eyes constantly flicking toward the meeting and back to his work. The tension in the room escalated when Ishida made a pointed accusation about the Kogagumi's shipping interests encroaching on established territorial boundaries. "Perhaps," Ishida suggested with cold courtesy, "there has been a miscommunication about where certain boundaries lie." Ryuichi's response was measured but firm. "The boundaries were established 3 generations ago, Ishida-san. My memory of them remains perfectly clear." As attention focused on this confrontation, Ichiro seized the opportunity to approach Hideo. With a grip that appeared casual but was certainly painful, he pulled the boy away from his corner, speaking in harsh whispers. "What are you doing with that tablet? Who have you been communicating with?" Ichiro demanded, his face close to Hideo's, spittle flying with each syllable. Hideo struggled to pull away, his face showing fear for the first time. As he yanked his arm back, his sleeve rode up, revealing what appeared to be a small tattoo or mark on his inner wrist. Across the room, Alexis saw this and immediately straightened, her hand moving subtly toward her hip, where a concealed weapon would typically be holstered. The mark clearly held significance beyond what anyone in the room might suspect. She made a decision, smoothly repositioning herself closer to where Hideo now stood with Ichiro. As she moved, she touched her earpiece again, whispering something inaudible to anyone more than inches away. The argument between Ryuichi and Ishida had reached a crescendo, drawing all eyes in the room. Security personnel from both factions had tensed, hands hovering near concealed weapons. The American and European investors looked increasingly uncomfortable, sensing the undercurrents of violence beneath the business discussion. In this moment of maximum distraction, Hideo's hands moved in an urgent series of tactical signs, his expression desperately trying to communicate something critical. Without hesitation, Alexis responded with the same specialized system, her movements precise and fluid from years of practice. Their exchange accelerated, both using identical military communication signs with increasing urgency. Gradually, heads began to turn as people noticed this unusual interaction between the ignored son and the foreign security consultant. Conversations faltered. The argument paused mid-sentence. All eyes moved between Hideo and Alexis as they communicated in a silent language only they seemed to understand. Ichiro was the first to react, reaching inside his jacket as he stepped toward Alexis. "Stop right there," he commanded, his voice cutting through the sudden silence. The room froze in tableau, Hideo and Alexis with hands still positioned in mid-sign. Ryuichi and Ishida half risen from their seats. Security personnel from all factions poised for action. International businessmen looking confused and alarmed. "How does this boy know classified military signs?" Alexis asked loudly, addressing the room but watching Ichiro carefully. "And why does he bear a mark reserved for special operations intelligence assets?" The tension in the room crystallized into something dangerous and electric. Ishida's eyes narrowed with sudden calculation, looking between Ryuichi and his son with new understanding. "What exactly is happening in my house?" Ryuichi demanded, his voice dangerously quiet as he turned toward Alexis. Then his son. "Who are you? And how does my son know these signs?" The room balanced on a knife's edge of potential violence. Security personnel from all factions had hands positioned near weapons, eyes constantly moving between their principles and perceived threats. The international businessmen had retreated toward the walls, sensing they were suddenly minor players in a much more dangerous game. Alexis Reeves maintained her position near Hideo, her professional demeanor transforming subtly into something more lethal, the security consultant facade falling away to reveal the combat operator beneath. "My name is Commander Alexis Reeves, Joint Task Force on International Weapons Trafficking," she announced, her voice steady and authoritative. "And your son has been one of our most valuable intelligence sources for the past 6 months." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. Ryuichi's face darkened with what appeared to be shock and betrayal as he looked at his son. "Impossible," he growled. "He's a child. He has no access to what, Koga-san? To your operations details, to shipping manifestos, to the movement of unregistered cargo through supposedly secure channels?" Alexis interrupted. "Children who are ignored see everything, especially brilliant ones. Children who are treated as invisible become perfect observers." Hideo stepped forward, his hands moving in the tactical sign language with increasing confidence. Alexis translated for the room. "He says he discovered the weapon shipments 3 months ago when reviewing the port security protocols on your servers. He didn't know who was involved, only that military-grade weapons were being moved through the new development." Ishida laughed, a cold sound without humor. "So, the great Ryuichi Koga uses his defective son as a spy against his business partners? Is this how you maintain your position, old friend? Family espionage?" "I have never," Ryuichi began, but Hideo's frantic signing interrupted him. "They're here," Alexis translated, her expression growing more urgent. "It's happening now. The shipment isn't scheduled for next week. It's being moved tonight during this meeting." As if in response to his warning, the building's power suddenly cut out, plunging the room into darkness before emergency lighting activated with a dull red glow. From outside came the distant sound of helicopters approaching. "Nobody move!" shouted Ichiro, drawing a weapon and pointing it at Alexis. "This is a setup!" Instead of showing fear, Alexis stepped protectively in front of Hideo, her posture shifting to combat readiness. "Put it down, Matsuda. You're already surrounded." "What have you done?" Ryuichi demanded of his son, his voice tight with controlled fury. "Do you understand what you've—" To everyone's astonishment, Ryuichi's next words died as his hands formed the same tactical signs his son had been using. His fingers moved with practiced fluidity, communicating directly to Hideo in the specialized language. Hideo's eyes widened, his own hands responding with increasing speed. Their silent conversation lasted only seconds, but the revelation stunned everyone watching. Father and son were communicating in a classified system neither should have known. "He's been working with you the whole time," Ishida realized, his face contorting with rage as he backed toward his security team. This entire negotiation was a trap. Ryuichi's expression remained impassive, but something had changed. The distance he'd maintained from his son had vanished. He signed rapidly to Hideo, who nodded and stepped closer to his father's side. "For 3 generations," Ryuichi announced to the room, "the Koga family has maintained a special relationship with certain international security interests. My father began the tradition during the American occupation. I continued it after the Cold War, and now my son carries it forward in the digital age." Outside, the helicopter sounds grew louder, and distant shouts could be heard from lower floors. "The weapon smuggling operation belongs to you, Ishida, not me," Ryuichi continued. "You've been moving North Korean military technology through my port development, using my legitimate business as cover while planning to frame me if discovered." Alexis added, "We've been tracking these shipments for months, but couldn't identify the principal organizers until Hideo made contact through an encrypted gaming platform. He provided the final links we needed." "The ignored, invisible son," Ryuichi said, genuine pride entering his voice for the first time. "The perfect observer that everyone underestimated, including my ambitious lieutenant." All eyes turned to Ichiro, who still held his weapon trained on Alexis. His expression had transformed from confidence to calculation to the dawning realization of defeat. "You were reporting to Ishida all along," Ryuichi stated, "feeding him information, helping coordinate the weapons movement, planning to replace me once I was compromised." The building shook slightly as helicopters hovered outside the windows. The sounds of a coordinated operation echoed through the building, boots on stairs, doors being breached on lower floors. "It's over," Alexis said simply. "Joint Japanese-American Task Force. Every exit is covered." Chaos erupted as joint forces breached the room from multiple entry points. Specialized operators in tactical gear secured the space with practiced efficiency, detaining Ishida and his associates while separating the legitimate businessmen for questioning. Ichiro attempted to flee, but was quickly subdued. Through it all, Ryuichi remained calm, signing instructions to his son, who responded with equal composure. As the operation unfolded around them, they maintained a silent conversation that revealed years of hidden communication and planning. Once the situation stabilized, Alexis approached them, her professional demeanor returning. "That was unnecessarily dangerous, involving your son this way," she said to Ryuichi. "He could have been exposed at any time." "The ignorance was a carefully maintained cover," Ryuichi explained, placing a hand on his son's shoulder, the first public display of connection anyone had witnessed. "Our apparent distance was necessary protection. No one suspects the child everyone ignores." Hideo signed something, and Ryuichi smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his severe features. "He says he contacted your agency independently," Ryuichi translated. "He didn't realize I was already involved until 3 weeks ago, when he decoded one of my transmissions." "Instead of shutting him down, you incorporated his operation into yours," Alexis observed. "He had already established valuable connections and methods I hadn't considered," Ryuichi acknowledged, looking at his son with newfound respect. The tablet he carried everywhere was collecting evidence all along, documenting conversations no one thought he could understand. As detained suspects were escorted from the room, Hideo's hands formed another series of signs, these directed at Alexis. "He's asking why you revealed yourself tonight," Ryoichi translated. "Our operation could have continued." Alexis knelt to Hideo's eye level, responding in signs rather than words. The boy watched her hands intently, then signed back, his expression serious beyond his years. "What did you tell him?" Ryoichi asked. "That we had intelligence suggesting Ichiro planned to eliminate him tonight," she replied quietly. He had discovered Hideo's communications and reported them to Ishida. They no longer considered him a harmless, disabled child. Ryoichi's face darkened with fury as he looked toward where Ichiro was being led away in restraints. "Then I owe you a debt beyond business arrangements, Commander Reeves." The room gradually emptied as suspects and witnesses were escorted to separate locations for processing. Hideo remained close to his father, their newfound public connection drawing curious glances from the task force members. Many had clearly been briefed about the boy's role, but seemed surprised by the revelation of Ryoichi's involvement. A senior Japanese official in plainclothes approached, bowing respectfully to Ryoichi before addressing Alexis. "Commander, our teams have secured the shipment at the port. Preliminary examination confirms North Korean manufacturing marks on the weapons crates. The evidence appears substantial." "Thank you, Inspector Tanaka," Alexis replied. "We'll need full documentation for international prosecution." After the official departed, Ryoichi guided his son to the windows overlooking the Dotonbori district, the neon light still pulsing below, despite the drama unfolding above. The city continued its nightlife, oblivious to the power shifts occurring in its shadows. "For years I've maintained this distance," Ryoichi said quietly to his son, speaking aloud, though Hideo couldn't reply in kind. "It was meant to protect you, to keep you beyond suspicion, but it also made you the perfect observer, didn't it? Invisible even to me at times." Hideo signed something brief, and Ryoichi nodded, a hint of regret crossing his features. "He says the role became easier to play than to explain," Alexis translated, having approached silently. "That sometimes a useful lie becomes its own reality." "And now?" Ryoichi asked his son directly. Hideo's hands moved in a sequence that even Alexis seemed to struggle with, their meaning complex and nuanced. Ryoichi watched intently, his expression softening with each movement. "He asks if he can still be useful now that he's been seen," Ryoichi explained. "If his value was only in his invisibility." The question hung in the air, vulnerable and painfully young, despite the sophistication of its delivery. For the first time, Alexis saw not the intelligence asset or the Yakuza heir, but simply a 13-year-old boy seeking validation from his father. Ryoichi knelt before his son, meeting him at eye level, something he had never done in public before this night. "Your value has never been in what others failed to see," he said firmly. "It has always been in what you chose to observe, in the connections you made that others missed. That skill doesn't diminish with recognition, it grows with respect." The words seemed to reach something deep in the boy, a tension releasing from his slight frame as he nodded once, accepting this new reality where he was no longer defined by his absence, but by his presence. "The operation is concluding for tonight," Alexis said, "but there will be extensive debriefings in the coming days. Both of you will need to formalize your status with the task force." "And the Kogagumi?" Ryoichi asked, practical even in this moment of personal revelation. "My legitimate businesses?" "Your cooperation has been documented at the highest levels," she assured him. "The distinction between your operations and Ishida's will be clear in all official reports. Your family's arrangement continues, with appropriate adjustments." As the last of the task force prepared to depart, leaving only a security detail to remain overnight, Alexis made a formal bow to both father and son. "I should join the processing team at headquarters. We'll speak tomorrow." Before she could leave, Hideo's hands moved in a final message, one that made Alexis pause, her professional mask slipping just enough to reveal genuine emotion. "What did he say?" Ryoichi asked. "He said that sometimes being seen is its own kind of freedom," she translated, "and that perhaps now he can learn to speak with his voice as well as his hands." The implication stunned Ryoichi. "You can speak?" he asked his son directly. Hideo's hands explained what Alexis then translated. "He says his muteness began as a medical condition, but became a choice. In a world where no one truly listened, silence became armor. But perhaps now, there might be a reason to find his voice. As the night settled around them, the three stood in silent understanding of how completely the world had changed in a single evening, how masks both visible and invisible had fallen away, and how sometimes the most profound power lay not in what was hidden, but in what was finally revealed. 3 weeks later, a different gathering convened at Koga Tower, smaller, more intimate, but still composed of individuals with significant influence. This time, Hideo sat prominently at his father's right hand, no longer hidden behind screens or relegated to corners. Clan members interacted directly with him, some even attempting basic signs they had begun to learn. Alexis attended as an official liaison, her role now formalized between agencies. The atmosphere had transformed from the tense negotiations of weeks prior. Respect rather than fear dominated the interactions, and Hideo's tablet had been replaced by a specialized communication device that translated his signs into multiple languages for international partners. Sunlight streamed through the same floor-to-ceiling windows that had witnessed the dramatic events of that night. The view of Dotonbori remained spectacular, but today it appeared in its daylight aspect, less mysterious but no less impressive in its urban complexity. The digital displays around the room now openly showed the legitimate shipping operations that had replaced the intercepted weapons trafficking routes. The transition has proceeded more smoothly than anticipated, Ryoichi was explaining to the assembled partners, his demeanor more open than anyone could remember seeing before the revelation. With the Ishida Gumi leadership in custody, their legitimate holdings have been restructured under appropriate management. A senior Port Authority official nodded approvingly. The development project remains on schedule. Security protocols have been enhanced, but construction continues uninterrupted. Throughout the discussion, Ryoichi regularly turned to Hideo for input, a gesture that still drew subtle reactions from longtime clan members. The boy's hands would move in concise, thoughtful responses, and his father would incorporate these perspectives into the ongoing conversation. Without translation, having clearly spent the intervening weeks improving his own sign language fluency, Alexis observed this dynamic from her position near the American interests she still officially represented. Her role had evolved from covert operative to acknowledged liaison, but her tactical awareness remained evident in how she positioned herself with clear sightlines and proximity to exits. Old habits died hard, especially for someone with her training. During a brief recess, she approached Hideo, who was reviewing documents on his new communication device. "Your integration into official operations has been impressive," she signed to him, keeping their conversation private. "The analysis team speaks highly of your contributions." Hideo's fingers replied with their characteristic precision. "Different form, same function. Before, I watched from shadows. Now, I watch from light." "And your father? How is that adjustment proceeding?" A complexity of emotion crossed Hideo's face before his hands responded. 13 years of habit changes slowly. He tries, sometimes remembers to look at me when others are watching, sometimes forgets when we are alone. Alexis nodded, understanding the challenge of reworking such deeply established patterns. "And your speech therapy?" His expression shifted to something more guarded, hands momentarily still before responding. "Slow, voice rusty from disuse. Doctor says physical structures intact, mental barriers more complex." Their conversation was interrupted by Ichiro's replacement, a younger man named Takamura, who had been elevated from within the clan's ranks. Unlike his predecessor, Takamura made a point of bowing respectfully to Hideo before addressing Alexis. "Commander Reeves, your presence is requested in the secure communications room, a priority transmission from your headquarters." As Alexis excused herself, Ryoichi approached his son, having observed the exchange from across the room. He settled beside Hideo, maintaining a physical proximity that would have been unthinkable before. "Commander Reeves appears to be settling into her liaison role effectively," he commented, "though I suspect she finds these diplomatic functions less engaging than field operations." Hideo's hands moved in response, a hint of amusement evident in his expression. "Yes, I noticed that too," Ryoichi agreed with a rare smile. She checked sightlines like someone expecting an ambush, even at a brunch meeting. This shared observation, small as it was, represented a profound shift in their relationship. The ability to comment on the same world from their respective viewpoints rather than maintaining the artificial distance that had characterized their previous public interactions. When the meeting reconvened, Alexis returned with a subtle tension in her bearing that both Kogas immediately detected. She resumed her position but caught Ryoichi's eye meaningfully, indicating the need for a private conversation. He gave an almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement. The remainder of the meeting proceeded according to agenda, finalizing agreements and establishing timelines for the next phase of development. As participants prepared to depart, Ryoichi directed Takamura to escort their guests to the executive elevators, while he, Hideo, and Alexis remained behind. Once the room had cleared, Ryoichi's demeanor shifted from diplomatic leader to alert strategist. "What development has occurred, Commander?" "Our intelligence division has intercepted communications suggesting remnants of Ishida's organization are reorganizing," Alexis reported, all pretense of being merely a security consultant abandoned. "They're seeking alliance with the Yamaguchi-gumi from Kobe." "Expected," Ryoichi responded, unfazed. "Power vacuums invite opportunists. Names?" "Ishida's underboss, Sato, currently operating from Kyoto. There's also interest from a Korean faction previously connected to the weapons shipments." Hideo's hands moved rapidly, contributing to the strategic discussion without hesitation. Ryoichi nodded at his input. "My son suggests their most likely approach would be through our shipping contractors rather than direct confrontation." He translated for Alexis's benefit. He recommends focusing surveillance on the harbor master's office and customs inspection teams. "Already underway," Alexis confirmed. "But there's a more immediate concern. Intelligence suggests they may attempt to re-establish credibility through a symbolic strike." She didn't need to elaborate. Both Kogas understood immediately what constituted a symbolic target in their world. "Hideo," Ryoichi stated rather than asked. "We've increased security protocols for his protection detail, but I wanted you both aware of the elevated threat assessment," Alexis continued. "There's specific intelligence suggesting they view his role in the operation as particularly worthy of retribution. The boy who was ignored becoming the instrument of their downfall represents a loss of face they find intolerable." Hideo's hands moved with calm deliberation, his expression thoughtful rather than fearful. Ryoichi watched his son's signs with evident pride before responding to Alexis. "He says, if they're focusing on him as a target, we can use that predictability to our advantage. A predictable enemy has already conceded the most important tactical ground." Alexis nodded approvingly at the assessment. "Your son thinks like an operative." "He's had excellent teachers, both formal and circumstantial," Ryoichi acknowledged. "We'll adjust security accordingly. I assume your team has recommendations." "Already forwarded to Takamura. But there's another matter to discuss." Alexis hesitated briefly before continuing. "Our surveillance has detected unusual financial movements from one of your legitimate subsidiary companies, Koga Shipping International, transactions that mirror patterns we observed in Ishida's operations." The implication hung in the air, clear but unspoken. The possibility of another traitor within the Koga organization. Ryoichi's expression hardened momentarily before he glanced at his son, whose hands were already moving in rapid analysis. "Cross-reference transaction timing with personnel access logs," Ryoichi translated, though Alexis could follow most of Hideo's specialized signs by now. He suggests focusing on employees with both financial system access and connections to the Port Authority. "Already in progress," Alexis confirmed, "but we wanted to bring this directly to you before pursuing further. Given recent events, trust parameters have been recalibrated." "Appreciated," Ryoichi responded simply. The complexities of their arrangement, balancing criminal organization leadership with government cooperation, evident in that single word. As the strategic discussion continued, a subtle shift occurred in Hideo's demeanor. He began massaging his throat with one hand while continuing to sign with the other, a gesture Alexis had noticed with increasing frequency during their meetings. Ryoichi observed this too, pausing mid-sentence to address his son directly. "You should rest your hands. We've been in discussions for hours." Hideo shook his head, hands forming a response that caused his father's expression to soften with unexpected vulnerability. "What did he say?" Alexis asked, missing the nuance of that particular exchange. "He said," Ryoichi replied with careful control, "that he wishes to try speaking aloud. that perhaps this discussion of security concerns is important enough to push through his barriers. The room fell silent as Hideo straightened in his chair, his face showing concentration and a hint of anxiety rarely visible in the composed young man. He rubbed his throat again, then opened his mouth with clear effort. The sound that emerged was raspy and uncertain, a voice unused to forming words, but the syllables were discernible. "Fei there," he managed, the effort evident but the achievement remarkable. Ryuichi's carefully maintained composure cracked visibly at this unexpected development. He reached toward his son but stopped himself, clearly uncertain how to respond to this breakthrough. Hideo continued with visible effort. Not from inside, he pushed out the words haltingly. The threat, from outside alliances. The content of his message was strategic, but the method of delivery transformed the moment from professional to profoundly personal. Alexis found herself momentarily looking away, feeling like an intruder on a private milestone. Ryuichi recovered his composure enough to ask, "How long have you been practicing speech?" Hideo's hands took over, more comfortable with signing for complex thoughts. Alexis translated this time for Ryuichi, whose attention was fixed on his son's face rather than his hands. "He says he's been working with the speech therapist daily since the operation, that he wanted to surprise you when he'd made more progress, but the current discussion seemed important enough to attempt communication, despite the difficulty." Ryuichi nodded, professional concerns and parental emotions clearly competing for priority. "Your assessment about external threats is consistent with our intelligence," he said, deliberately focusing on the content rather than the delivery. A kindness Hideo's slight relaxation acknowledged. "We should expand surveillance to include potential outside facilitation." The meeting continued with Hideo occasionally attempting single-spoken words, but primarily relying on sign language for complex concepts. This hybrid communication became its own kind of symbolism for the transition occurring in all aspects of their world, old methods and new approaches coexisting as they found their path forward. As they concluded their strategy session, Alexis prepared to depart for her next assignment, gathering the secure documents she'd brought for review. "Commander," Ryuichi said as she reached the door, "my son has expressed interest in continuing his education in a more formal setting, now that circumstances have changed. Your agency has recommended several institutions with appropriate security protocols." Alexis understood the unspoken question. "We believe the security situation can be managed effectively at any of those locations." His analytical contributions remain valuable, but there's agreement that broader development would be beneficial. Hideo's hands moved briefly, his expression determined. Ryuichi translated, "He says confinement was protection once, but isolation is no longer necessary for security or strategy. The best protection often lies in controlled exposure rather than complete isolation," Alexis agreed. "We'll coordinate with your security team on implementation details." After her departure, Ryuichi and Hideo remained in the conference room, the spectacular view of Osaka stretching before them, but temporarily forgotten as they navigated this new territory between them. "You've been practicing speech without telling me," Ryuichi observed, no accusation in his tone, merely confirmation. Hideo nodded, then deliberately chose to speak again, each word requiring visible effort but emerging with determination. Some things needed to be mine alone. The simple statement carried profound implications about autonomy, secrets, and the complex relationship between them. Ryuichi considered this before responding. "I maintained necessary distance for many years," he acknowledged. "But perhaps I allowed that strategy to become something beyond its original purpose." Hideo's hands moved, more comfortable with the nuanced sign language allowed him. Ryuichi watched intently, nodding as he absorbed his son's perspective. "Yes," he agreed finally. "The performance became reality for both of us in different ways. I apologize for that unintended consequence." These words, simple as they were, represented a seismic shift in their relationship. An acknowledgement of error from a man whose position demanded infallibility in the eyes of his organization. Their conversation was interrupted by Takamura's return, bringing security updates and schedules for the following day's meetings. The moment of personal connection receded as operational concerns took precedence, but something had fundamentally altered between father and son, a barrier breached that could never be reconstructed. The following weeks brought accelerated changes to both the Kogagumi operations and Hideo's personal development. Enhanced security measures were implemented discreetly throughout their holdings, focusing particularly on the port development project and financial systems. Alexis's intelligence unit identified and neutralized 2 potential infiltration attempts, confirming the continued external interest in undermining the Koga organization. Hideo's speech therapy progressed steadily, though he continued to rely primarily on sign language for complex communication. His increasing vocalization became a barometer of trust, speaking aloud only with his father and Alexis, maintaining silence with others even as his capability grew. On a crisp autumn morning, 6 weeks after the operation, Hideo prepared for his first day attending Osaka International Academy, an exclusive school with exceptional security protocols and a history of accommodating students with unusual circumstances. His uniform was precisely arranged, the school crest emblazoned on the jacket pocket gleaming in the morning light, filtering through his bedroom windows. Ryoichi entered after a respectful knock, himself dressed formally for a different meeting. He observed his son with an expression that balanced pride with barely concealed concern. "The security detail will maintain distance but constant surveillance," he reminded Hideo. "Takamura has personally vetted every member of the team." Hideo nodded, hand signing a response that made Ryoichi smile slightly. "Yes, I'm aware Commander Reeves has also assigned covert personnel to supplement our team. Interagency cooperation at its finest." The boy's hands moved again, this time with a teasing quality that would have been unimaginable months earlier. "I am not being overprotective," Ryoichi protested with mock offense, "merely strategically cautious." This light exchange represented one of countless small shifts in their relationship, the emergence of natural father-son interactions beneath the formality of their clan positions. Such moments remained brief, often quickly submerged beneath operational concerns, but their increasing frequency marked an evolution both were carefully nurturing. As they prepared to leave the private residence section of the Koga compound, Hideo suddenly stopped, turning to face his father directly. With visible determination, he spoke aloud, the words coming more easily than they had weeks earlier, but still requiring conscious effort. "Thank you," he said clearly, "for allowing this change." Ryoichi understood the multiple layers in this simple expression of gratitude, the acknowledgement of risk accepted and control relinquished. He placed a hand briefly on his son's shoulder, the physical contact still new enough to feel momentous. "You've earned the right to determine your own path," he responded. "Within reasonable security parameters, of course." Hideo rolled his eyes at the qualification, the quintessential teenage response making him appear, for just a moment, like an ordinary boy rather than the extraordinary young man who had helped bring down a weapons trafficking operation and transformed a criminal empire. Later that afternoon, as Hideo attended his first classes, Ryoichi met with Alexis at a secure location near the port development. Construction cranes towered above them, the physical manifestation of legitimate business emerging from complicated foundations. Initial reports indicate school integration is proceeding smoothly, Alexis informed him as they walked the perimeter of what would eventually become a major shipping terminal. Security protocols functioning as designed. "And the Yamaguchi connection, any further developments?" "Surveillance indicates they've declined formal alliance with Ishida's remnants," she confirmed. "Your diplomatic outreach appears to have been persuasive." Ryoichi nodded, satisfaction evident in his typically controlled expression. Traditional rivalries can sometimes be useful. They preferred established boundaries with the Kogagumi over unknown variables with Ishida's underboss. They continued discussing operational details, the partnership between government agency and criminal organization maintaining its delicate balance through mutual necessity and carefully defined parameters. As they concluded, Alexis handed Ryoichi a secure phone. "He wanted to call you himself after his mathematics placement test," she explained. Apparently, the results were noteworthy. The surprise on Ryoichi's face was genuine. Despite their evolving relationship, direct communication during the school day hadn't been anticipated. He accepted the phone with carefully concealed emotion, stepping slightly away for privacy. The conversation was brief, Hideo's spoken words still limited and the circumstances constraining elaborate discussion. But the call itself represented another barrier crossed, the choice to share a small personal triumph immediately rather than waiting for their scheduled evening debriefing. When Ryuichi returned the phone to Alexis, his composed expression had returned, but something in his eyes had softened. "It seems the advanced placement was appropriate," he commented simply. "He's testing at university level in mathematics and computer science," Alexis noted. "Your son has extraordinary capabilities beyond his operational contributions." "Yes," Ryuichi agreed, allowing genuine pride to surface momentarily. "Though I suspect he'll always find practical applications for theoretical knowledge, given his unique perspective." As they parted ways, Alexis watched Ryuichi return to his waiting vehicle, the Kogagumi leader resuming his public persona with practiced ease. Yet she had observed the subtle transformations occurring beneath that carefully maintained exterior, the gradual integration of father and clan leader into a more coherent whole. The operation against Ishida had eliminated a significant threat and disrupted dangerous weapons trafficking. But perhaps the most profound outcome had been this unexpected humanization of both the feared Yakuza boss and his once invisible son, their relationship evolving from strategic alliance to genuine connection without diminishing their effectiveness. Later that evening, Ryuichi sat with Hideo in the private garden of the Koga residence, listening to his son's account of his first day at school. The boy alternated between sign language and spoken words, the latter emerging more frequently in this secure, private setting. "The other students," Hideo said carefully, forming each word with deliberate precision, "they don't know who we are." "That anonymity is intentional and necessary," Ryuichi confirmed, though limited to school interactions only. Hideo nodded understanding, then continued with signs for more complex thoughts. His father watched attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, their conversation flowing between verbal and non-verbal communication with increasing fluidity. As night fell over Osaka, lights illuminating the garden in a gentle glow, Ryuichi found himself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of recent months, from the carefully orchestrated deception that had placed his son in the shadows to this new reality where Hideo stepped cautiously but deliberately into the light. They navigated a transformed landscape of both personal relationship and operational strategy. The threats remained, external pressures still demanded vigilance, and their world would never approach anything resembling normalcy. But something fundamental had shifted, a foundation rebuilt with stronger materials than before. The boy who had been deliberately rendered invisible had found his voice in more ways than one, and in doing so, had helped his father rediscover parts of himself long subordinated to necessity and strategy. As Hideo continued sharing observations about his new educational environment, his spoken vocabulary expanding with each passing day, Ryuichi allowed himself to appreciate the unexpected gift hidden within operational necessity. The revelation that sometimes the most effective strategy might also be the most human one. 2 months after Hideo began attending Osaka International Academy, the Koga Tower hosted a formal ceremony unlike any in the clan's recent history. The same room that had witnessed the dramatic confrontation with Ishida now displayed traditional decorations interspersed with modern elements, reflecting the evolution occurring within the Kogagumi itself. Senior clan members gathered in precise hierarchical arrangement, their formal attire a blend of Western suits and traditional Japanese elements. Representatives from allied organizations stood respectfully along the perimeter, while selected government officials occupied designated positions that acknowledged both their importance and the careful boundaries of their relationship with the Koga interests. Alexis Reeves attended in an official capacity, her status as liaison now formalized in documentation few would ever see. Her positioning near both American officials and Koga security personnel visually represented the complex intersection of interests she navigated daily. Ryuichi Koga stood at the head of the assembly, his posture perfect as always, but his expression markedly different from the impenetrable mask he had worn for decades. Still commanding, still formidable, but with a subtle shift towards something more accessible to those permitted into his inner circle. "Today we honor tradition while embracing necessary evolution," he addressed the gathering, his deep voice carrying effortlessly. "For generations, the Kogagumi has survived by adapting to changing circumstances while maintaining our core principles." The assembled members nodded in solemn agreement, particularly the elders who had witnessed multiple transitions in leadership philosophy over their long service. Recent events have demonstrated both the wisdom of our established methods and the necessity of new approaches, Ryoichi continued. Our traditional strength has always been complemented by strategic foresight, seeing opportunities where others perceive only threats. His gaze swept the room, acknowledging key figures with subtle nods before settling on the entrance where Hideo now appeared, escorted by Takamura. The boy walked with measured steps, his school uniform replaced by a formal kimono bearing the Koga crest. At 13, he remained slight of build, but his posture and expression conveyed a gravity beyond his years. The room fell silent as Hideo approached his father and bowed precisely, the depth calibrated to show appropriate respect, while acknowledging their blood relationship. Ryoichi returned the gesture with equal precision before turning back to the assembled clan members. Many of you have served the Kogagumi with loyalty for decades, he acknowledged. You have witnessed our organization's growth through challenges both external and internal. Today marks another significant transition in our history. From a lacquered box held by an elderly clan member, Ryoichi withdrew a ceremonial tanto knife in an ornate sheath. The weapon gleamed in the carefully arranged lighting, its craftsmanship evident even from a distance. This blade has been passed through the Koga family for 7 generations, Ryoichi explained, holding it with reverence. Each heir receives it when they are recognized as the future of our clan. The significance of the moment registered throughout the assembly. Though Hideo's position as Ryoichi's son had always been acknowledged, his status as heir had remained formally unrecognized, partly due to his perceived disability, and partly due to the strategic distance Ryoichi had maintained. Hideo Koga has demonstrated the intelligence, courage, and strategic thinking required of leadership, Ryoichi stated formally. Through his actions, he has brought honor to our name and security to our interests during a period of significant threat. He presented the tanto to Hideo, who accepted it with carefully practiced movements. The ceremonial exchange performed flawlessly, despite being the first public recognition of his official status. What happened next, however, had not been part of the planned ceremony. Hideo tucked the tanto into his obi, then deliberately raised his hands, signing a message to the assembled clan members. Though most could not understand the specific signs, the intent to communicate directly was clear. Then, with visible effort but remarkable clarity compared to his early attempts, Hideo spoke aloud. I accept this honor with gratitude and responsibility, he said, his voice stronger than anyone except Ryoichi and Alexis had heard before. My commitment to the Kogagumi is absolute. The reaction rippled through the room, surprise transforming to murmurs of approval. The boy they had long been conditioned to ignore, whose muteness had been accepted as permanent weakness, stood before them, demonstrating unexpected strength in multiple forms. Ryoichi allowed a rare smile to appear briefly before continuing with the formal ceremony, guiding Hideo through the traditional rituals that officially recognized his position. The proceedings continued with carefully choreographed precision, clan members approaching in order of seniority to offer respect to both current leader and acknowledged heir. When the formal portion concluded, the gathering transitioned to a more relaxed celebration. Hideo moved through the room with his father, accepting congratulations and engaging in brief conversations that alternated between spoken words and sign language, depending on his comfort level and the complexity of the exchange. Alexis observed this integration from her position near the international contingent, noting how the clan members adjusted their behavior toward Hideo. What had begun as awkward attempts to acknowledge his new status was evolving, through his own measured responses, into something approaching natural interaction. Remarkable transformation, commented the American diplomatic representative standing beside her. A career Foreign Service officer with enough clearance to understand portions of the complex situation, both in the young man and in the organization's approach. Adaptive systems survive changing environments, Alexis responded diplomatically. The Koga interests have always excelled at strategic evolution. Still, to place such responsibility on one so young, the diplomat mused. Cultural differences notwithstanding, he remains a child by most standards. Alexis watched as Hideo navigated a particularly complex exchange with an elderly clan member, his composure unwavering. I've found age to be an unreliable predictor of capability, she replied, particularly in extraordinary circumstances. As the celebration continued, Ryoichi eventually made his way to where Alexis stood, having completed his official duties as host. "Commander Reeves, your presence honors us," he said formally, though the slight incline of his head acknowledged their more complex relationship. "The ceremony was impressive," she responded. "Your son handled himself with remarkable poise. He has had excellent examples of composure under pressure," Ryoichi noted with a meaningful glance that recognized her role in recent events. Though public speaking remains his most challenging frontier, they maintained professional conversation for the benefit of observers. But beneath the diplomatic exchange lay the shared understanding of how profoundly circumstances had changed from their first encounters. What had begun as a covert operation, leveraging an ignored child's observations, had transformed into a complex partnership that redefined relationships on multiple levels. As the evening progressed, Hideo eventually joined them, his formal demeanor showing signs of the fatigue that came with maintaining such intense focus on communication and social interaction. "You've impressed everyone," Alexis told him when there was momentary privacy. "Your speech has improved dramatically." Hideo nodded, then chose to respond with signs rather than vocalization, preserving his energy. His hands moved in the specialized communication they still shared from his intelligence work. "Different audiences require different performances," Alexis translated for the benefit of the nearby diplomat, editing slightly for security. "He says he's learning to balance various expectations. A diplomatic skill many adults never master," the American official commented with approval. The celebration continued into the evening, clan members and international representatives gradually departing according to protocol, until only the core Koga leadership and selected allies remained. As the formal nature of the gathering dissolved, Hideo's exhaustion became more evident. Ryoichi, noticing his son's fatigue, smoothly concluded the remaining discussions. "Tomorrow will bring new challenges requiring clear minds," he stated, effectively ending the event, while maintaining the appearance that it concluded at his predetermined timing, rather than in response to Hideo's needs. After the final guests departed, Ryoichi, Hideo, and Alexis moved to the private section of the Koga residence, where the ceremonial formality could be set aside. Hideo immediately relaxed his posture, the strain of maintaining perfect composure throughout the lengthy event visibly releasing. "You performed flawlessly," Ryoichi told his son with genuine pride. "Your speech during the ceremony was particularly effective." Hideo switched entirely to sign language now, his hands expressing what his voice had been carefully rationing throughout the evening. Alexis followed the rapid movements, noting how his communication style changed in this private setting. "He says the ceremonial acceptance was the only part he memorized and practiced specifically," she translated, though Ryoichi was now proficient enough to follow most signs. "The rest was improvised based on necessity. The most convincing performances often contain genuine elements," Ryoichi noted. "Another lesson from our recent experiences." Hideo signed something that made both adults pause, his expression suddenly serious despite his fatigue. "What did he say?" Ryoichi asked Alexis, uncertain of a particular sequence. "He asked if we're certain the security breach in your financial systems has been completely resolved," she translated carefully. "He's concerned about patterns he observed in recent transaction reports." Ryoichi's expression shifted immediately from relaxed parent to alert strategist. "The team identified and eliminated the infiltration point 3 weeks ago. All systems were verified secure." Hideo's hands moved again, this time with the precise technical signs he had developed during his intelligence work. Both Ryoichi and Alexis paid close attention. The celebratory atmosphere completely evaporated. "He's suggesting there may be a secondary access point designed to activate only after the primary breach was discovered and cleared," Alexis interpreted. "A sleeper protocol embedded in legitimate systems." "What evidence supports this?" Ryoichi asked his son directly. Hideo retrieved his tablet, which had remained nearby even during formal ceremonies, and quickly navigated through secured files to display transaction patterns across multiple Koga business entities. His fingers moved rapidly across the screen, highlighting subtle anomalies that would be invisible to anyone lacking his particular pattern recognition abilities. As Ryoichi and Alexis studied the data, the implications became clear. Despite their successful identification of Ishida's primary infiltration, a secondary system appeared to be gradually positioning itself within the legitimate financial infrastructure. This is sophisticated work, Alexis observed, beyond what we would expect from Ishida's remaining technical team. External support, Ryuichi concluded grimly, likely the Korean connection you identified previously. Hideo nodded, then signed a series of recommendations with the confidence of someone who had been analyzing the situation extensively before bringing it forward. He suggests allowing the secondary protocol to continue operating under controlled observation, Alexis translated, rather than eliminating it, immediately tracking it to identify the ultimate recipients of the information. Ryuichi considered this strategy, his expression thoughtful, a calculated risk, but potentially higher value intelligence. Your assessment, Commander? I agree with Hideo's approach, Alexis confirmed after careful consideration. My team can implement additional monitoring safeguards while maintaining the appearance of an unsecured channel. It could lead us to connections we haven't yet identified. The discussion continued late into the night, the ceremonial recognition of Hideo's position transforming seamlessly into practical application of his analytical skills. Despite his physical fatigue, his mental acuity remained sharp, contributing strategic insights that complemented Ryuichi's experience and Alexis's operational perspective. When they finally concluded, Ryuichi escorted his son to his quarters, the ceremonial tanto, now properly displayed on a stand beside Hideo's bed. Today held many significant transitions, Ryuichi observed, as Hideo prepared for rest. Public recognition, ceremonial acceptance, and immediately into active strategic planning. Hideo smiled slightly, then deliberately chose to speak rather than sign, though his voice was hoarse from the day's unusual usage. Life rarely provides convenient pauses between chapters. This philosophical observation, delivered with such adult perspective, reminded Ryuichi yet again of the extraordinary circumstances that had shaped his son's development. Before he could respond, Hideo continued with visible effort. I have been thinking about what it means to be truly seen, he said carefully. Before, invisibility was protection and strategy. Now, visibility brings different strengths and vulnerabilities. Ryuichi nodded, understanding the deeper implications. The ceremonial recognition today makes you a more visible target to our enemies, but also surrounds you with more formal protection from our allies. Not just organizational visibility, Hideo clarified, his voice growing softer with fatigue, but his determination to communicate verbally remaining strong. Personal recognition, being acknowledged rather than overlooked. The vulnerability in this statement struck Ryuichi with unexpected force. Behind the strategic calculations and ceremonial significance lay a simple human desire for acknowledgement that transcended operational considerations. I have always seen you, Hideo, he said quietly, even when strategy required me to pretend otherwise. The boy nodded, accepting this, but adding with his hands what his tired voice could no longer express. Ryuichi followed the signs carefully. He says that being seen by one person in private is different from being recognized by many in public. Alexis translated from the doorway, where she had arrived with additional security updates. That today closed a circle begun when you first pushed away his tablet during the meeting with Ishida. Ryuichi absorbed this perspective, recognizing the symmetry his son had identified. What had begun with public rejection had transformed through crisis into public acceptance. The strategic distance deliberately collapsed into acknowledged connection. Rest now, he told Hideo, momentarily resting a hand on his shoulder. Tomorrow brings implementation of your monitoring strategy. After Hideo settled for the night, Ryuichi and Alexis moved to the secure communication center established within the Koga compound, where her team had already begun implementing the surveillance protocols Hideo had recommended. His analytical abilities continue to exceed expectations, Alexis noted as they reviewed the initial monitoring data. The pattern recognition that identified this secondary infiltration is remarkable. He sees connections others miss, Ryuichi agreed, a skill developed through necessity when conventional communication was unavailable to him. They worked through preliminary security adjustments, establishing parameters that would allow the apparent vulnerability to remain while implementing safeguards against actual data compromise. The technical teams from both Koga's organization and Alexis's agency collaborated with surprising efficiency, their previous operational success having established effective working relationships. As dawn approached with immediate security measures in place, Ryuichi finally addressed the broader implications of their situation. The ceremonial recognition of Hideo's position will accelerate certain timelines, he observed. Our enemies will perceive it as strategic consolidation and may feel pressured to act sooner rather than later. We've anticipated this, Alexis confirmed. Security protocols at his school have been enhanced, and our intelligence gathering has been redirected toward imminent rather than long-term threats. Beyond physical security, Ryuichi continued, there are organizational considerations. Today's ceremony publicly acknowledged what many had already recognized privately, that Hideo represents the future direction of the Kogagumi. A direction some traditional elements may resist, Alexis noted carefully. Ryuichi nodded, the reality of internal politics as significant as external threats. Change always encounters resistance. Some see evolution as betrayal of tradition rather than its preservation through adaptation. How will you address potential internal opposition? The same way we address external threats, Ryuichi replied, with strategic foresight and appropriate preparation. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent communication from the monitoring team. One of the financial anomalies Hideo had identified had accelerated unexpectedly, suggesting their observation had potentially been detected. As they rapidly adjusted security protocols, Ryuichi was struck by the seamless integration of their response teams, criminal organization, and government agency personnel working with coordinated precision that would have been unimaginable months earlier. By mid-morning, when Hideo joined them after necessary rest, the immediate security concern had been contained. He entered the command center with the ceremonial tanto, now properly secured at his side, its presence both symbolic and practical in its new role. The monitoring strategy yielded results sooner than anticipated, Alexis briefed him as he reviewed the overnight data. We've identified external servers in Seoul connecting through multiple proxy locations. Hideo nodded, hands moving in rapid analysis, as he integrated this new information with his previous observations. His signs had taken on increased technical specificity, developing almost a specialized dialect for cybersecurity discussions. He suggests they accelerated their timeline in response to yesterday's ceremony, Ryuichi translated. They interpreted the public recognition of his position as a potential threat to their infiltration, which confirms they've been monitoring internal Koga communications as well as financial systems, Alexis concluded, more extensive than we initially assessed. The strategy session continued through the day, expanding to include senior Koga security personnel and selected technical specialists from Alexis's agency. What had begun as a ceremonial recognition of Hideo's position had transformed into his first major strategic challenge, a multi-layered security response coordinated across organizational boundaries. Throughout these intense discussions, Hideo alternated between sign language for complex technical concepts and spoken words for direct questions and confirmations. His voice, though still measured in its usage, grew increasingly confident as the situation demanded clear communication across teams with varying sign language proficiency. By evening, they had established a comprehensive counterintelligence operation designed to track the infiltration to its source while feeding controlled information that would misdirect potential attacks. Hideo's analytical framework provided the foundation, with Ryuichi's strategic experience and Alexis's operational expertise, building the implementation structure. As teams deployed to execute their assigned responsibilities, Ryuichi, Hideo, and Alexis stepped away briefly, moving to the private garden that had become an informal meeting ground when they needed perspective beyond the tactical focus of the command center. Yesterday's ceremony and today's security response represent perfect symmetry, Alexis observed as they settled in the carefully maintained space. Public recognition immediately followed by practical application of the very skills that earned that recognition. Hideo signed a response that made Ryuichi smile slightly. He says timing is rarely coincidental in our world, Ryuichi translated, that ceremonies and crises often arrive together because they emerge from the same underlying conditions. Philosophical, as well as tactical, Alexis noted with approval. A balanced perspective needed in leadership. As night settled over the garden, the koi pond reflecting the carefully arranged lighting, Hideo made a deliberate shift from tactical discussion to more personal reflection. choosing spoken words despite the day's extended usage of his voice. "When I was believed mute and ignored," he said carefully, "I imagined recognition would change everything. Now, I understand it merely changes the nature of the challenges, not their existence." This insight, delivered with such clarity after an intense day of security operations, highlighted the extraordinary duality of his development. The tactical strategist and thoughtful heir somehow integrated within the same young man. "Recognition brings responsibility," Ryoichi acknowledged, "but it also brings resources and support that isolation cannot provide." Hideo nodded, then continued with signs rather than taxing his voice further, his hands moving with the grace and precision that had become his primary form of expression. "He says that being seen clearly by others helps him see himself more accurately," Alexis translated. "That identity forms through reflection as well as internal development." As they sat in momentary quiet contemplation, a security alert from Takamura indicated that their monitoring operation had identified additional connections within the infiltration network. The brief respite ended as they returned to the command center, where the strategic dance of intelligence and counterintelligence continued through the night. 3 days later, their coordinated effort culminated in simultaneous operations across multiple locations, disrupting not only the immediate infiltration of Koga systems, but identifying a broader network attempting to establish influence throughout regional criminal organizations. In the operation's aftermath, as various teams compiled results and assessed implications, Hideo stood beside his father in the command center, reviewing the information with the focused attention that had become his trademark. The ceremonial tanto remained at his side, its presence now accepted as naturally as the tablet computer that rarely left his possession. What struck observers most was not the technical success of the operation, but the transformed dynamic between father and son, organization leader and acknowledged heir. The strategic distance that had once defined their public interaction had been replaced by a coordinated partnership that strengthened both individual and organizational effectiveness. As the immediate crisis response transitioned to longer-term security implementation, Alexis found Hideo in the garden again, this time alone as he processed the events of recent days. "Your first official challenge as acknowledged heir has been successfully navigated," she noted as she joined him beside the koi pond. "Impressively handled." Hideo chose to respond vocally, his speech showing the improvement that came with regular practice. "The acknowledgement merely formalized what was already reality," he said carefully. "The capabilities existed before the ceremony." "True," Alexis agreed, "but public recognition changes how those capabilities are perceived and utilized by others. You've experienced that transformation firsthand." He nodded, thoughtful as he watched the fish navigate their peaceful world, so different from the complex currents he and his father navigated daily. "In intelligence work, we're taught that being underestimated is an advantage," Alexis continued. "You've had to transition from strategic invisibility to visible leadership while maintaining operational effectiveness. Few could manage that evolution so effectively." Hideo signed his response, the complexity of his thoughts exceeding his current verbal capacity. Alexis followed his hands with practiced attention. "He says that invisibility and visibility each have their purposes, their strengths and limitations," she interpreted aloud, though no one else was present to hear. "That perhaps true effectiveness comes not from choosing one state permanently, but from knowing when each serves the greater purpose." This philosophy, emerging from a 13-year-old who had navigated extraordinary circumstances with remarkable adaptability, struck Alexis as profound beyond its immediate application to their situation. It spoke to the universal challenge of balancing public and private selves, acknowledged and hidden capabilities, in a world where perception often shaped reality as powerfully as truth. As Hideo continued his reflection, balancing ceremonial recognition with practical application, public acknowledgement with private capability, he embodied the evolution occurring within the organization he would someday lead, adapting to changing circumstances while preserving essential foundations. The boy once ignored by everyone had found his voice, literally and figuratively. The silent observer had become an acknowledged strategist, and in that transformation lay not only his personal journey, but a template for the organization's evolution, demonstrating that sometimes the most profound strength emerged not from rigid adherence to tradition, but from the courage to adapt, when circumstances demanded change. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Someone who worked silently in the background, changing everything while others took the credit?